this Mina Shamayim, okay, that I didn't finish the end of last year because, frankly, I realized they didn't have the answer. Not that I can say, Shiur that I have the answer now, but I think it's closer, and it's maybe Nikom Devayamis. We asked the question, if you recall, when you're talking about Syria Avodah Zarah, and the Rambam clearly in Shorish Zion says that Syria Avodah Zarah is Fikah, which means that it's another way to Mekayim the mitzvah of Chatas Kavua. So he said, okay. However, when you look at Shorish Yudalid, the Rambam has a whole different way of discussing how you decide about whether there's a mitzvah of din korban chatos or a din chatos kavua or din oshem tolui or oshem vadai or kol mola v'yered. And the Rambam clearly says that the avonos, that the type of chatoim are very important in kviyas. And that he says, in Yudalid, I'll read you part of Lashon Kfar Yodata, Shemini HaKorbon, the different types of korbanos which he counts as mitzvahs, Yischalfu B'schalik L'Abonos, She's Chayev Aleim. There's the different mitzvahs are somehow a function of the Abonos. And that's what he says. Avol ulchein lo nimna chatos im ha'osham, avol nimna chiyuv chatos kavua mitzvah, v'chiyuv osham vadai mitzvah. Okay? We don't know 100% from here. One could make a statement that Shorish Zion is to put together mitzvahs. Whereas Shorish Yudal at this point, he says that Osham and Chatos would be one mitzvah if you wouldn't go after Avonos. Okay? So maybe this is really not a proper quote. He says Avonimna, but he says Avonimna Chatos Kavua mitzvah, B'chiyuv Osham Vadai mitzvah, B'chiyuv Osham Tolui mitzvah, B'chiyuv Korban Oile B'yerid mitzvah, is chayiv oise korban l'chol mishi is chayiv, and l'chayra he's talking about avonos. So we have to know. It's not 100% clear. However, after he introduced what I introduced last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure if it was, when the Rambam in Mitzvah Ayin Hey, we asked the question, why is Zav v'Zava, the korbanos is Zav v'Zava, two mitzvahs, it's the same korbanos, the same oifis. That's what Ram says. So he answers, Yeda makshahu shekorban zav v'zova eno al chatoim, avu korban shechoyva l'asayisay, al inyam min inyanim, v'ilu inyanone azivus v'anoshim dova echod, kamo shehu b'shem zeh zav v'shem zoi zavo, oz hoi roilim noisa. So it means if what is mechayiv, the korban and zav and zava will be the same, even though it's not avonos, it would be one mitzvah. Okay? And that is the kiveh. If it's the same mechayiv and it's the same min korban, then it's one mitzvah. He's saying, we don't know, because he's saying the fact that it's the same min korban is not enough. But you need also that the min korban also depends upon what causes the chiyuv. Now, we can ask the question. Because basically, the korban of Syria Avodah Zarah, there's a different avon which is mechayevit. There's an avon Avodah Zarah, and the rest of the korban chatas kavua is a chiyuv kares, and with the lav. So maybe there should be two separate mitzvahs and two separate avodas, because the Torah changes. See, if you're talking about a Pakoi Moshiach or Siyar Nosi or Chatas Hedyet, it's the same chet. Different people do different chet, different korbanos, but the machayiv is the chet. So it's all one Shem called Chatas Kavur, and the Kohen Gadol, the Pa Kohen Gadol, and the Siyar Nosi, and the Chatas Hedyet, okay, or all different permutations, different ways that this mitzvah expresses itself. Okay. However, when you come to see Avodah Zarah, one could have said that the Avodah Avodah Zarah is a separate Avodah, and it should be two separate categories. Okay. This is what I have to deal with now. Until this point, it's very clear that if it's one Avodah, if it's the same Avodah, the same min korban, it's one mitzvah. And the reason why Zav and Zav are two separate mitzvahs, because the Zav is on Loivin, and the Zava is an Oidim, and the Oidim and Loivin are basically two separate things. So now, I'd like to flip this and use this as the answer. Okay. Because the Rambam has a very interesting question. He asks, why is it when I talk about korbanos of mechusei kapara in Ayin Hey, in the same place, he asks a very interesting question. He says, why is it when I talk about avonos of Zav and Zava, I count it as two, in terms of the mechusei kapara? The mechusei kapara and Zava are different. And when it comes to mitzera and mitzaras, it's the same. Okay. He doesn't get involved. The Torah is different dinim of pareya, not pareya, and pareya, okay, I'm not getting it. And it's the same. Okay. So the Rambam asks, why is that so? Why is that so? The Ein Din, he says, the Ein Din, Zav v'Zovo, Din mitzera u'mitzeras. Okay. And why is it so? He brings a raya. V'raya brura, it's very clear, incontrovertible. V'raya brura, al ze omrom b'krisus, the Chachmei HaMesera, Omrom b'krisus, Arbo'a mechusei kapora. The beginning of the second parak of Krisus, it says there are four mechusei kapora. The Elohein, Hazov, V'Azova, V'Yoledes HaMitzera. It's an amazing thing. The Matiki Ashmur are writing a Mishnah in the second parak in Krisus, and we're interested just in a list of mechusei kapara. And the Ram says that since the Matiki Hashmur said that mechusei kapara, you're counting them, Zav and Zova are two, and Mitzera is only one. So when I come to Minyan HaMitzvos, I count Zav and Zova as two, and Mitzera as one. Which is absolutely amazing. But I just want to start with one thing. What is the assumption over here? What is the assumption over here? The assumption over here, again, and I say this again and again and again and again, that the Matiki Hashmur, Dram learned when he discussed in the Hakdoma the Pirush Mishnayos, and he talked and he explained the Gemara in Eruvin, of Ketzat Seder Mishnah and talking about the syllabus. What did Moshe Rabbeinu teach Aaron, and then Aaron Ubonov, and then Aaron Ubonov is Canaan, and then Kol Ha'om? He taught them the syllabus was Tayag Mitzvahs. He taught them the Mikra, which basically embodied the mitzvah, and he taught them the Torah Shabbat Peh. And this Ketzat Seder HaMishneh is the tafkid of the Bali HaMeseir L'Deres to give over this Meseir of Tayag Mitzvahs. The Mishnah is about Tayag Mitzvahs. Ketzat Seder Mishnah. So in that Meseir, what the Chachmei Meseir give are giving over the minyan of Tayag. And since that's their responsibility, when they say a Mishnah in the beginning of the second paragraph of Krisis, when there's the 4 different mitzvahs of Mechusei Kapora, and they want to tell you that it's 4 and not 5, they say Zav, Zovo, Yoledes, and Mitzvah. And in that, the Megale to us that it's basically Zav and Zovo are 2, and Mitzvah and Mitzvahs is 1. So I want to tell you that maybe the Rambam could do the same thing with Sir Avodah Zarah and make it part of Chatas Kavua, because the Matiki Hashmur put Sir Avodah Zarah as part of Chatas Kavua. And since they did, it was an Edus of Matiki Hashmur that this is the mitzvah, the same way they gave an Edus, the Mitzvah and Mitzvahs is 1. And I'll show you what I mean. Because the Mishnah says in Krisis, in Perik Aleph, Mishnah Aleph and Mishnah Beis, it says, Shloshim v'sheish Krisis b'Torah, Habol ha'eim or the Arayis, v'chulei v'alanida, Magadev, v'over Avodah Zarah, v'chulei v'apesach v'amilah, v'mitzvah saseh. Then he goes on. Al elu chayovim al zdonim koris v'ashiros echatos v'alohoidela shelohen oshim toli. On this whole list, even Avodah Zarah, together with all the other chayvei krisis, is one chiyuv called a chiyuv al hoide al shirosim chatos, which includes Chatas Avodah Zarah and Chatas of all other Chayvei Krisis, V'alohide Shelohen Oshem Toli. Chutz men ha-metamei v'ha-mikdash u'kadoshim, Yivnei Shuhu ba'ile v'yered. There's a korban called Ule v'yered, or the Matiki Hashmur is a separate mitzvah as a korban called Chatas. And in the korban Chatas, you have Sir Avodah Zarah and all the rest of Chayvei Krisis. That's what I would tell you in Rambam. This said that when the Matiki Hashmur are talking about what we call the mitzvah, the Abba Mechusei Kapora, when they talk about the Korban Chatos and the Korban Olam V'Yered, and they tell us what is subsumed under it, they're basically Megala. Megala Tefech, U'Mechaset for Chayim, and telling him that this is the mitzvah. I would bring to this a few. The Rambam basically also clearly assumes that it's all one conglomerate chiyuv. The Rambam in Hushkogris Perik Aleph Halacha Daled, he talks about 43 averis, and he includes Avodah Zarah in that list of the Chatoim Shemei B'nei Chatas Kavua. And he just explains that there might be different Bali Chaim you brought. Chatas Kavua, he abo min abehema bilvad v'korban olam v'yered hu korban she'eno kavua v'chulei. And then he says, Nimsis lamed shekol averu shayochid maybe ashir gos chatos kavua aboyim v'sholosh. וכולי. הרי אלו הבוים ושלוש אוויר שמביא לחדש קבוע. ומהו הקורבן שמביא? השוגי באחס מאלו. אם שוגה בעבודה זרה, מביא עז, בהשנוסה לחדש. ואמור בפרשת שלח לך. And that's what he goes on. It's very clear in the Rambam that this is what the Chatas Kavur, which Chazal are talking about, that submission increases. I would suggest something, that maybe the Rambam had another sad or two for this. One is, there is a difference, if you remember, I mentioned a Shiur or two before this, that maybe three, I'm not sure, the Kohen Gadol in the Par Kohen Gadol is different than the Siyar Nasi that he requires Hira also. If there's no Hira, there's no Chiyuv Chatas. But I pointed out that the Pshat is, it's not that the Hira is the Mechayiv, like in Par Helam Dovo, but the Hira is basically a T'nai. So therefore, we said the Par Helam Dovo is a separate mitzvah, because there it's the Mechayiv. So once it's the Mechayiv, with this, the whole discussion we have now, that has a different Mechayiv, it can't be the same mitzvah. And that's how the Rambam using these also, this equation, that the Zav and the Zova, and that the Mechayiv is Kevei, a different Minei Korban. So Mamela, the Par Helam Dovo, is a separate mitzvah. But we said the Par Kohen Mashiach, that the Hira is necessary, but it's only T'nai. Okay? You understand yourself, okay? Therefore, in Par Helam Dovo, it could be part, Par Kohen Mashiach, it could be part of the mitzvah called Chatas Kavur, because the Hira is only tonight. Now, if a Kohen Gadol comes and he is over one of the Averes that are Mechayiv and Osham, would anyone in their right mind claim that they need a Hira? Right? You would say absolutely impossible, correct? Because there's nothing to do. So now the important question is, what happens in Sir Avodah Zarah of Kohen Mashiach? You have to understand, in Avodah Zarah, in the Sir Avodah Zarah, Nasi, Hedjit, and Kohen Gadol bring the same korban. What would you say about Hira? Okay. You can imagine you don't need Hira because they're all the same. But if you do need Hira, what do you see from that? You can't imagine Hira in Osham. If it's Hira, it's a Raya, then it's a Chatas Kavur. And that would prove the Rambam's point. Because the din is, in the Rambam, Perek Tezvav, Ruch Shkogos, Halacha Gimel, Chil le'atzmoi, levatel mixes, or lekayim mixes, v'avodah zora, ve'osa kfi hira asay. Harizeh maybe si'ira kehedit, v'hu she'yishkei b'hira, k'mo she'b'yanga. Or this din of shiv hira is required in the Sir Avodah Zarah. And if the Sir Avodah Zarah is not Chatas Kavur, it doesn't make any sense. She'ein HaKohen HaMashiach chayev b'korban ela b'helam dover b'hira. She'ein HaKohen HaMashiach chayev korban ela b'helam dover b'hira. Im shigas ha'maisa ketzibo. Al mishogam ha'maisa b'vad b'lo hira. Bein b'avodah Zarah, bein b'shar mitzvos, eino mevi korban klal. But you understand, it's nothing to do with Osham. This, I think, is a very good raya. Okay. And then I'll tell you something, which I'm not sure how strong it is, but I think it's indicative. It's an amazing thing. How do you know that Chatas Kavur requires chayve krisis. Okay. So you know what happens? Chazal derive it from Avodah Zarah. And you understand yourself. If Avodah Zarah wasn't a chatas kavua, the whole thing is ridiculous. And listen to this. Here's the Gemara. In Samachesam and Be'ez Shabbos, Teira achas yelochem le'ese b'shkoba, Samachesam and Aleph, uksiv v'chi sishku v'leisasu es kol HaMitzvos ho'ele, uksiv v'nefesh esa'at ta'ase b'yod romo, hukshu kulam la'avodah zarah. Ma lahalon dova shechayom mazdono kores shiras achatos avko shechayom mazdono kores shiras achatos. And since this is the keveya of chatos kavua of what you need, so l'chayitz adova portion that this is that both avodah zarah and other things are all one thing called chatos kavua. Okay. Now, next. This is called chatas kavua, and there's something called korban olav. And the Rambam says over here in the mitzvah that the keveya of chatas kavua, it's min ha-behema bilvad. He says, v'zuhi chatas kavua, kloimer shir olam chatas behema. So I'm just trying to understand what with the Rambam, what would have been if it would have been an if also and not a mincha? What's the issue over here? What does the Rambam want? The Rambam says it similarly in Hilchos Shkogis Perek Aleph Halacha Dalet, Chatus Kavua hi abo'o min ha-behema bevad. It's only behema. The korban olav yid hu korban she'eno kavua. Elohim hoya oshir maybe chatos behema, the im hoya oni maybe oif, or asiris hoeifo, kmoshi is boya. And then he says also in Asay Ayin Beis, v'bnei ho inyan nika olav ki hu lo yamoid b'min echad, avo yuva mizeh min pam achas, umizeh min pam acheres, v'yashogis yad achotzei, achoyte shechayiv lohoviv hakorban. So I was only wondering, what does he need? What does he need the behemoth for? One of the things that occurred to me that the issue over here of smicha and vidui is only on chatas behemoth. In Dalus, in korban olav yid, there's no smicha and no vidui. And vidui is certainly part of the akovas hakorban. In Minyan HaKotzer, in Ayin Gimel, we're talking this more barichas as time goes on. I hope to get to it next. I hope so. Lizvades lifnei Hashem mikol chet shiasa odom b'shas hakorban u'shloi b'shas hakorban. The separate chiyuv vidu b'shas hakorban, it's part of the korban. Even so, the Rambam had a havamina that maybe it shouldn't be a separate mitzvah. Okay. Now, you could have even, so that might be an option. That might be an option of explaining what's going on in Behema. You could have flipped it in a different way. You could say like this, that it's not the point that it's a behema, but it's not a mincha, because you call it chatos kavua, it has to be korban chatos. And there is an oifes, a korban chatos. But there's no korban chatos. There's no korban chatos in mincha. It's called a minchas chayte, it's not a chatos. So chatos kavua is kishmo kenhu. It's only a chatos. However, just to be frank with you, the Rambam does just the opposite. Because in Shiur Shvi'i, the Rambam calls korban orev v'yoreh a korban chatos. Listen to the lashon. Okay, so you could have said this, but you certainly can't say it. V'kvato b'zeh rabim v'kol ma shemotzu kosuv monu mibilti histakus b'shirish HaMitzvah v'lo b'dikter tenero. And he says, Hamosho b'zeh chiv hakosuv b'sefer vayikra lemetame mikdosh u'kadoshim v'niskorim imoy korban chatos. Okay? It's an amazing thing. So we have to ask ourselves, if Lamaisa, the Ram is ready to say a korban of the area is called a korban chatos, so then this is not the answer. Okay? Now, it could be just very simple that the fact that the korban changes, that itself is a kaveh, it's a different min korban, and Shalom Yisrael. Whatever you want it, the Ram is very clear that korban orev v'yoreh you can call it korban chatos and Shiur Shvi'i. Now, interesting, the Ram continues at the end of the mitzvah, mishpat mitzvah zu kula kva yisboyer meseches hoyos krisos u'makoyos mishabes u'shvus zvochem. Here he uses the Arabic word by mishpat u'fikeh. Fikeh, if you recall from Shiur Shvi'i, is the various permutations of the mitzvah. How various ways you can mekayim the mitzvah. In other words, you can mekayim the mitzvah with Parkol Mashiach, or Siyar Nasi, the Chatas Kavur, or Hedjit, and also the Siyar Avodah Zarah. And this is fikeh. And the Ram says here chatos, where chatos is basically an expression of fikeh, it's not, and because the Rambam uses this in Shirish Zion as an example that you count it as one, it's certainly apropos that it should use this word to talk about mishpat and not the general word he uses. This won't answer all the issues, but I think for here, it certainly is okay. The next mitzvah, mitzvah ayin. By mitzvah hashivim, he shetzivonu lahakriv korban ksheyischadish lonu sofek bi'echod me'oisen achatoyim agedolim shechayom mazdono kores v'ashirgos chatas kavur. Now, just before we go into this, I'm just a little bit confused because if you look at the Arabic, there is a word. It says, I think what the words say in the Arabic is sheesh, unless I'm making a mistake, sheesh chadish lono sofek or she'ir lono sofek lakiv korban mesuyim, okay, ki she'ir lono sofek bi'echod me'oison hagedolim, and the chatoim, the Junuv, okay, which is a chet, is not mentioned over here. And it's mentioned in all the other cases, in Chatas Kavua and in Oshem Vadai and in Korban Levi. He says basically the mechayiv is to bring a korban mesuyim. He doesn't say that it's Oshem. He says that it's Oshem in the next mitzvah when it comes to Oshem Vadai. You happen to say that this is called in Chazal Oshem Tolui, but at the beginning he says korban, and it's korban mesuyim. That's probably the proper Arabic translation. Now, we have to understand, it's a very important thing, that everyone understands that when it comes to the Maisa Korban, when the Rambam counted Maisa Korbanos, of Oshem Vadai and Oshem Tolui is all one Korban. However, when it comes to the Chiyuv HaKrova for the min Korban, you have to say before he's talking about Maisa Oila, Maisa Chatos, Maisa Oshem, Oshem Vadai and Oshem Tolui is all one. When it comes to the Akrova, Lahakriv Chatos Kavua, Lahakriv Oshem Tolui, Oshem Vadai, Oshem Tolui and Oshem Vadai are two separate mini Korbanos. See, you have a problem. Because basically, the korban of Oshem Tolui and Oshem Vadai is the same exact behemoth. The Gemara says in Kedushin, on Nun Hey Beis, V'dilma Oshem hu, Oshem ben shtei shonim, V'ishtakach ben shona. So the Gemara says, the Oshem is b'nei shnei shonim. Okay, so excuse me. V'dilma Oshem hu, so it means Oshem ben shtei shonim, all Oshem. Oshem Vadei and Oshem Tolui is ben shtei shonim. He says, however, v'ishtakach ben shona, v'dilma Oshem mitzeirahu, Oshem nozihu, lo shchiach. So called Oshem is b'nei shtei shonim, except for Nozi Mitzera. The Ram Pirsha Mishnah and Krisis, Perek Vov Mishnah Vov, Vosh is Sifra, Mava and Oshem Shibcha Ufa, Shuhu Ayil, Umotzi Oshem Nozi, Oshem Mitzera, She'eno Ayil. We should call Echod Man Keves, Moshe Bi'an, Bagdom Seder Zu, V'chein Oshem Toli, Omaboy Akosim Shu Ayil. So it's all the same. I'm not going to get involved in this. The Rambam Perek Dalet of Hilchos Tzul Mekdoshim, Halach Chabeis, is mashma that the Oshem Vadi and the Oshem Toli might be slightly different. Okay? The Achronim go to town with this Rambam. But however, I wouldn't base a teretz on that. Okay? You have an amazing thing. I mean, the Ram doesn't mention anything about this here. So all this, the Shoni doesn't even discuss over here in the min korban of Oshem Vadai and Oshem Tolui how old the Oshem is. So this is not a something meaningful here. And the question is, how does this happen? Why is this so? Why don't you say there's all one mitzvah of min Oshem and Oshem Vadi and Oshem Toli is fikeh, and it should come under Shiur Zion? So I would tell you, if you go back again to this discussion that the Ram said that Oshem and Chatas is not one mitzvah. Remember in Shiur Yudala, he says, Kfar Yodata, Shemini HaKorban, Yischalfu B'Schalif Mavunis, Shischalif Aleim HaKorban. And then he says, "Umehem mashi is chayiv olav oshem vadai, umehem mashi is chayiv aleim oshem toli." So it's very clear in the Rambam that the fact is that different avonos, a different machayiv. It's like zav v'zova, so that's keveya, a different mitzvah in minyan mitzvahs. Okay. So that we have. However, I think it's more than that. So one of the cases, the case of Oshem Toli, is the Korbonah, is the Avonos which is Mechayev Achatos. It's Davka Chayve Krisis with a Maise. And the case of Oshem Vadai is a conglomerate of various Avonos which the Torah lists off. There is cases of Ashem Shivchalufa, there's Ashem Gzelos, and Ashem Milos. The Torah lists off these avonos. It's a clearly different set of avonos, a separate Mechayiv, a separate Min Korban. Even though it's the same Korban, it's not worse than Zav and Zava, which is the same Korban. But in Chefsa, this is on Oidim and this is on Loivin. This is on a Chatos and Chayvik Krisis and a Shoigeg, and this is sometimes Mazin, sometimes Shoigeg, a different set of Avonis. Beyond that, the Chefsa of Oshem Vadai is a Kapol. With the discharging of the obligation of bringing the Oshem Vadai, this kapara, as the Ram says in the next mitzvah, Korban Oshem v'yichupa aloi. However, when it comes to Oshem Tolui, where it's lehoida, you're not talking about a kapora in the real sense of a kapora, but the kapora is lahogin ad shehida, and we'll talk about this more about Richusim Letz Hashem. And if that's the case, even though you could have imagined that the Oshem Vadai is a min oynish, the Oshem Tolui Adraba is a chesed habeire. And I'll tell you what I mean. The pshat is that, and we'll see about this later, we'll see it very clearly. I don't want to get into this now, that it might be that the lahogain, that it's basically to protect the person in the interim period until he brings the korban chatos. And then it's a chesed instead of really an oynish. And then it has simply nothing to do with Oshem Vadai. And we'll see more about this whole idea of Hagono and as we go on. Let's want to go further. The next point. Oshem Toli is only on that which is Chayev Chatas Kavua. And that's the Mishnah in Krisis. V'chomo imrim, ein mevim Oshem Toli al aldovish es dono kores v'shigos v'chatos. And it's mavur in the Rambam in Shkovis Periches Aloch Aleph Kol Chet Shechayev v'shigos v'chatos kavur chayovim al loyhoide sheloi Oshem Toli. Umahu loy noida in the topic im shoga bedove zeh or loy shoga. How is it mitzvah aktiv osham? Shenem lo yoda v'oshem v'nos havoinoi. The heavy ayil tomi min atzoim be'elkocho. Loshem v'zeh anik osham toli. Minei shu mechapi ala sofik v'teile loy ad sheyivodo loy b'vadei shechotori shogo v'yakriv chatosei. It's an interesting thing he does. V'yakriv chatosei. There I can understand. But it's the same thing over here. Look at this. He says, she's chadish lonu sofik, v'yechol me'oisena chatoim ha'gedolim, v'chulei. V'teira sofik v'chulei. And then he says, Oz yaku yakriv korban ala sofik ha'mischadish v'yechupa loy boy. V'u'aniko oshim toli. V'im his ames loy, if he finds out that he actually was a chayte, achakein, ki achaticha shochel he chelev, whatever, he chelev koyes, he neis amiso hashkogo, v'yakov chatas kavur. Isn't that a little bit odd? Why is the Rambam in the mitzvah from Oshim Tolui telling us that if it's noin haloi, he's makav chatas kavur? It's very odd. He does it in Hilchos Shkogas, but that's passable. The Rambam's telling you the din of what happens. But what does it do with Sefer HaMitzvos? What does it do with the mitzvah of Oshim Tolui? The pshat is that the Rambam is telling you that the mitzvah of Oshim Tolui is basically a loinoida of Chatas Kavur. And that gufa, that's why he quotes it together, that gufa is the machalik into a separate mitzvah. It's a Chatas Kavur, and there's the Oshim Tolui. And the Oshim Tolui is on the loinoida of that which is machayim the Chatas Kavur. And the Oshim Tolui is not mafkir that chiyuv. Basically has within it that potential, the potential chiyuv, Chatas Kavur, that's machayim the Oshim Tolui. So then it's an amazing thing that in a certain sense, the mechayiv from Oshim Tolui and Chatas Kavur is one mechayiv. And in a certain sense, is a min korban different. Because the min korban over there is taka machaper, and this min korban is korban mesuyam without a shem, and it's only to be megan until you have the potential chiyuv, but since it didn't come into fruition, is hagoma. Two separate mitzvahs, minyan mitzvahs. In fact, you understand now, as the Ram says in Shkogis, that there's only Oshim Tolui in Chatas Kavur. And therefore, as the Gemara says in Krisus, Achaf Beis, Amid Beis, Hocha Hainu Taimo, the Rabbonon de Patre, that there's no Oshim Tolui in an Oshim Vadai. Hocha Hainu Taimo, the Rabbonon de Patre, the Gemire mitzvahs mechatos malahalon dove shechayom azdono kores vashigos chatos, that there is an Oshim Tolui. Of course, shechayom azdono kores shigos chatos. Maybe al svekei Oshim Tolui. La fukei miilo. The ein chayom azdono kores. Okay, and Mimela, there's no Oshim Tolui. The Oshim Tolui is only in the potential chiyuv of Chatas Kavur. And so much so, he has to say in the midst of Oshim Tolui that if it's Noida, he's chayav the Chatas. an amazing thing. So this and this together, these two discussions I had together, I think give a reasonable understanding of why Oshem Tolui is a separate mitzvah from Oshem Vadai, and at the same time, it's a separate mitzvah from Chatos, because it's not a Chatos, it's an Oshem or whatever, and it's a Hagona, and it's not a Kapara. Okay, now, let's go further. Now the Rambam says something very important over here. He finds it important in Oshem Tolui to tell us graphically what the Mechayev is. It's called something called Kavur. That if I have two pieces of meat, one is or two pieces of some edible substance, one is chaylev and one is shumon, one is mut and one is asa, and I take one and I don't know which one I took. So that's where there's a chiyuv Oshem Tolui. Stam Sofik, there's no chiyuv Oshem Tolui. That's the Ramshi. That's what he says over here. V'teya Sofik hazeh, she's chadis, she's chayiv of Oshem Tolui, hu sheyeh lefonav derech moshel shtei chaticha shumon, achas mehen chaylev kloya, and chaylev kloya is Achiyuv Koles, the Ram in Perik Zayin, Vilchos Malchos Asuis Alachei, and V'acheres Shumon Alev, which is Mutter, the Ram in Perik Zayin, Vilchos Malchos Asuis Alachates. Okay? So now you have Chaticha Achas and Beis Chatichas. And you have the, okay. And then you go like this. The Ram says like this in Perik Ches of Hilchos Shkogas Halacha Beis, Eino Chayev B'Oshem Tolui Ad Sheyeh Shom Isa Kavua. This is what we're talking about. Ketzad Ochel Chaylev B'Safek Im Hoye Gezayis Oy Pochos MiGezayis Oy Shoyis Lefonav Chatichas Chaylev Chatichas Shumon V'Ochal Achas Mehen. Then you do a Eizim Mehen Ochal. And it's only because there are two options. And you have both in front of you. And Perik Aleph, in the Pirush HaMishnah, increases of Mishnah Beis, V'im hoyi lefonav shtei chatichas chaylev, v'achas chaylev mutter, v'ashniya also, v'ochal achas mehen, v'hoyi le'safik, im asui hi she'ochal o amuteres, harizeh chay b'oshem toli, v'u'ayil minatzei. Then he says like this. Someone else ate it, so he came from Bavaria or was lost. So you have no idea of what you ate. So he says like this. He says, "V'nofla b'nafshay hamachshava." It's a very v'nischadish lo asofik. V'nofla b'nafshay hamachshava. The way it is in Kapach is. Okay. And v'ira lo asofik v'nis'or b'libo chashash im ha'chaticha she'ochal hoyisa hamuteres o asura. So l'cheira pash l'Rambam, even though you would have said it on what he said before, but I didn't say it because the Arabic wouldn't support it. But over here, when he's talking about Shnis Eil Asofik, he was not aware before he ate it of the possibility of Isa. It's only afterwards. And that's Nis Eil Asofik, Nis Eil, this Chadish. And that's the Ram is talking about here. Nis Eil B'libo Chashash, V'Eil Asofik. So Achreinim say befrat, you'll find in Minchas Chinuch, in Vayikra, it's Kuf Chav Ches, that the reason why you need Nis'ur Sofik, because if he would have known about the Sofik before, he's not a Shav Midiyosai. He would have done it anyway, so he's not a bona fide Shogeg. I would say further than that. I would tell you in the Rambam that it's more than in a Shav Midiyosai. The definition of Shegeg in the Chiyuv Oshem Toli requires the fact that it's Iroloi Asofek v'nis'ur b'li b'chashash. If it's an issue of Eino Shav Midiyosai, it's not a place over here in Minyan HaMitzvos. Minyan HaMitzvos is the definition of the Shegeg. And that's what he's telling you. What the Shegeg is that this feeling of what happened? Where am I? How did this happen? Maybe it happened. What's going on? That goof is the machayev. However, this true is, and I'll read you a lashon of the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnah. It just lets the Ram says, "V'yiyeh loy ze siyog," that the korban osham shetishkeit nafshe bekach, that he should have some type of psychological rest and be calm about this possibility of chet. Tishkeit nafshe bekach. And this is then the definition of the type of shegeg. However, even though this is beautiful in Pirush HaMishnah and in Sefer HaMitzvos, in Mishnah Torah, this idea that I'm grappling psychologically with, maybe I was chayte. The doyev nafshay, you don't find in Mishnah Torah. The Rambam Perek Ches Halacha Aleph, umahu loy noida im nistapik loy im shogeg b'dov zeh or loy shogeg zeh. He just has a suffix. How is it? Mitzvah l'hakiv oshem shenema v'lo yada v'oshem v'nosa avoyne v'hevi ayel tomim. This whole graphic discussion. That's only in retrospect, that's what the Korban does. That it's Toiloi. But that's not the Machayev. The Doiv Nafshoy here and in Pirush HaMishnah seems to have a different approach in what the Machayev is. Now, here, there's something very important. I'm not sure I'll have a chance to finish it today. In the Rambam, the fact that we picked Kavua Ha'isa is very important, because the Ram Shita is that this only in the case of Kavua Isa do we say Safek D'Chaisa L'Chumrah. The Rambam Hilchos Tumas Mes Perek Tes Halacha Yud Beis Dov Yadua Shekol Elu Atumos Yitz Ben Mishum Safek Hari Devrei Ve'ein Tomim Ben HaTorah El Kol Mishenit Matumas Vadai Avo Kol HaSvekis Ben Atumas Ben HaMachos Asus Ben Barayis V'Shabos Ze'ein Lohem Ele Midivrei Seferim V'Afa Pikein Dober Shechrom Zono Kores Svekei Osa Min HaTorah Shari Oisa Oisei Chayiv Oshem Tolu. But the Chayiv Oshem Tolu tells us in this particular suffix that it's Svekei L'Chumrah. The Rambam Another Rambam in Perik Tezvov Visui Bialoch Choftes Uminayin Ani Oimer She'en Ashisuki Hu Asufri Osa B'chol Isha She'ef She'tiyeh Erva Olov Shaharei Hakosh She'nivdeka Imai Eino Osa B'chol Isha She'ef She'tiyeh Erva Olov B'harei Nema Batera Al Techalil is Bitchol as Noisa, which means Erva, the Rambam learning. The Omu Chachomim She'im Ya'aseh Ze Nimsa Ov Noise Bitoy V'ach Noise Achesei V'ilu Hoyadin Shekol Mi She'enu Yodea Ovim B'vadei Osa B'kol Asher She'ef She'tiyeh Erva Lov Lo Yinu Boim L'mida Zois Lo Olam V'lo Tiyeh Ha'odom V'lo Siyeh Ha'oretz Malaya Zima, Holamarita, Shein Oisrin Arayos, Umachzikin Oison, Beshe'er Bossa, Besofik, Ad Sheyivode Bevadai Shizu Ervolov. Again, the same thing. Sheim Atoime Kain, Kol Hayisim Sheba'ulam, Shalei Kila Viseim, Hoyasul Inose, Bechol Mokim, Shema Yifku Be'ervo. The Chassam Sofer points this out that the whole din of Suffolk is depends upon these two Rambams. That in Kavua it's also Chayve Krisis, and the rest of the case Suffolk Elva is Mut Chassam Sofer in Chuvas Chele Gimel Eben Ezer Siman Ayin Gimel. Okay, now here the next step. This comes the Shar Yoshe, this is his, whatever it is Mokum Nichol, his Gader, in Shar Aleph, Perek Gimel, he basically says that the Machukas, the Ram and the Rashba, of Sofik, the Reis of the Chumur or not, is an issue of whether the person is allowed to be Machnis Atzmo Lebeis HaSofik, Menater or not. The Ram says you're allowed to be Machnis Lebeis HaSofik, and the Rashba says you're not allowed to. L'chayr to a portion in Rambam, you're allowed to machni suffer the base of Suffolk. But if you found out afterwards that you were chayte, you're certainly chayiv. It's only a heter to be machnis, but you have to take the ramifications of your actions. So Lu Yitzur, a person would eat a suffix of chaylev and find out afterwards that it was chaylev, he has to be a kol mechatos, but there's no carbon, there's no ashim toli in between. Okay. Now, so it means that the chiyuv chatas kavua is in a case where I was also to be machnis atzme beis HaSofek. I just wasn't aware of the Sofek. In Chatich Achzmei Chatiras, I can't put myself into that Sofek. So this is the case, and there's also, if you're interested, this is not what I'm here to talk about. The Marit also talks about Osel Hachnas Beis HaSofek. It's a Marit, in Shuvas Marit, Chelik Beis, Yodei, Siman Aleph. Okay. And that's what's happening over here. In the Chatas Kavua, in the case of Kavua, I'm Osel Hachnas Beis HaSofek. And but I wasn't aware that there was a Beis HaSofek over here. And if I find out it's Dov Nafshi, I bring the Osham Torah. Now, okay, I think we'll stop here, and Mitzvah Hashem will pick up next week.